Great. Wow. It's amazing to be here with you, George. It's like deja vu.
It is deja vu. What, 4 times now?
This is the fourth year.
Fourth year, yeah.
First year was during the pandemic, and then we've just kept it going.
We have.
Yeah. It's bringing flashbacks. Good ones. Good ones. Great. So, it's a sentimental day today because it's 5 years since we launched Smarter Mobility Africa Summit. It's 4 years since we launched with AutoTrader the South Africa EV Car Buyers Survey. And we're all excited, I think, to hear the latest results because you guys are the masters of data. You're incredible at capturing that data and then putting it into formats that it just makes it so easy for us to understand and then do something with it, right? Because that's why the data's there.
Yeah, thanks, Ben, and thanks for inviting us back again. So what we try to do with the data that you point out is try and gauge EV perception, the penetration in the market, what consumers expect, and the purchase intent, as well as awareness and trust. So, if you wait to the end, the awareness and trust slides are quite interesting in terms of who the movers and shakers are. And, while it's the same song in terms of the story, it's nice to now be able to compare it 4 years in a row.
Absolutely. And I think something we should also mention is the data set that you use is from your website traffic. And the people going on your website are what I think you call in-market car shoppers.
Yeah, so we have approximately 4 million in-market car shoppers per month visiting AutoTrader's platform, and we collect hundreds of thousands of data points on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, the last time I checked, a consumer conducts a search every 7 seconds on AutoTrader's platform. And so we reach statistical significance very quickly when we put together studies like this.
Wow. I'm just imagining you guys sat in the office with this crystal ball in the middle, because it sounds like the data you've got can almost help you predict what's coming in the next few years.
Yeah, the leading indicators are what we put these reports together for, exactly.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for capturing this data. So let's unpack it. What's come out of this year's report?
So, it's more of the same in terms of what we call the Trinity. But if we just move to the first slide, 3 out of 5 passenger vehicles manufactured in South Africa are exported, and I think that is a key factor in considering where South Africa's new energy vehicle future is at the moment and where it needs to go to. So that's a bit of an uphill battle. So at the moment, South Africa manufactures 0 battery electric vehicles. Toyota manufactures hybrids, but we manufacture 0 battery electric vehicles. And considering that 3 out of 5 passenger vehicles are manufactured leave the country, it's important that we set our sights on the manufacture of battery electric vehicles. And the third dilemma that comes out of this report, and that we need to move faster, is that most countries have set deadlines anywhere between 2030 and 2035. So that first column in terms of current export is the thing that's at risk and the biggest dilemma. And the data speaks to the wheel turning, but turning very slowly.
And if I may add to that, because even though my country, the UK, started to try and backtrack on the targets of when they would ban new sales of internal combustion engines, honestly, when you look at many of the policies and the dates set, the market will naturally shift away from internal combustion engines before that policy date. Why? Because in many cases those new energy vehicles are proving to be more efficient, more viable, they're complying more with certain policies within cities around air pollution and congestion zone and all of that. So see any dates that you see that as the last final date, but potentially by 2029 some countries will already be at 80% new energy vehicles.
Yeah, exactly. Look at Norway.
Yeah.
Norway is a classic example. So the first thing we measured was consumer penetration, and this section specifically is to understand how many consumers own or have owned or even driven an electric vehicle. And getting right into the data, it's encouraging to note that almost 20% of South African consumers have at least driven an EV.
That's
up
huge.
From 15% in the previous study in 2022.
That's a really encouraging stat.
It's very encouraging, and it shows that consumers are beginning to experience these vehicles, trying to understand them. The 58% of consumers who want to own an EV in the future, that hasn't moved much in the last couple of years, but it's the vast majority of consumers that want to own an EV. It's just those barriers that are in the way. We've got 7 EV brands on sale in South Africa, up to, I think, another 9 were launched. And then in 2022, this is just the period that this report covers, but we had 502 units sold, which is up 136% on last year. So we're almost doubling EV sales in the country all the time.
So we know the direction of travel, and we've spoken extensively about the relationship of experience and ownership and appetite. Are there any insights regarding the perception which tells us the level of education that consumers have?
So education is always a gap, Ben, and the way we glean how consumers are educated or how educated they are is to ask them questions around the advantages and disadvantages of EV ownership and their perception thereof. And it turns out that reduced emissions is still the biggest reason for owning an EV in the country at the moment. So most consumers say that that's the most important thing to them. And you can see that cheaper running costs is third on the list when it comes to the advantages of owning an EV. I think that reduced emissions and air pollution are important, but perhaps consumers are underestimating the reduced running costs of owning an EV.
Yeah, well, great to see that they are aware of the green or the cleaner benefits of it. I guess that's encouraging, but it seems like there is some education to do around the other areas. So what are some of the disadvantages they perceive?
So here's an interesting one, and that the cost of EVs 2 years ago wasn't on this chart. It was way down on this chart, and suddenly over 2022 and 2023, the cost of EVs has become the biggest disadvantage that consumers perceive. And what that tells us is that consumers are becoming much more aware of the cost of EVs because they're wanting now to get into an electric vehicle. The next 3 are no surprise: charging time, charging infrastructure, and then load shedding. If we touch on load shedding for just 1 second, I've been living with an EV now for a good going on 3 years, and load shedding doesn't impact my EV.
Wow, this is really interesting stuff. So there are some quite significant changes then around the perception. Interesting to see prices number 1 now, whereas charging and range used to be the biggest concerns. With that being said, what are the consumer expectations around electric vehicles before they buy one?
Yep, so consumer expectations were set up in the survey primarily to deal with, well, I perceive something one way, but what do I want? What do I expect when I actually own that particular EV? And what's interesting to note is that nothing really much has changed in terms of consumer expectations. 85% of the respondents would use their EV as a primary vehicle, and in 2022 that was 87%. So a slight shift in what they would use the EV for, and I think this is important because it shows that South Africans don't want to own new energy vehicles as a Sunday driver or a luxury vehicle. Consumers in South Africa need mass adoption because it's an everyday driver, and that will bring us to that trinity a little bit later on. Which another perception that we discovered in the survey, or should I say expectation we discovered in the survey, was 60% of consumers are willing to pay up to 500,000 Rand for an EV. Now, this number hasn't changed in all the surveys that we've done. It seems to be egging towards 600,000 Rand, but it was as high as 73%. It came down to 65%, and now it's at 60%. And what's happening is there's a shift for the appetite for between 500,000 and 600,000 Rand. So that's why that percentage is getting lower. But the vast majority of consumers, in order to gain mass adoption, we need to bring the price of a new energy vehicle, particularly an electric vehicle, down below 500,000 rand, and we're not there yet.
Yeah, very interesting. So the sticker price, the initial cost, has always been the biggest barrier. You yourself, as you've said, have driven an electric vehicle for 3 years. You've owned it. It's your car. It's what you use. What about the running costs?
So I can speak directly to the running costs in terms of my own personal experience, and it is approximately 71% cheaper to run than an ICE vehicle. If you merely take the fact that a South African consumer on average uses about 60 litres of petrol every 1 to 2 weeks, and that works out to about 1,500 Rand a week, or about 7,300 Rand a month. Using the same mileage of 2,600 kilometers, I need to fully charge my car at a cost of 2,106 Rand per month, as a comparison to 7,300 Rand per month. So that's about a 5,200 Rand per month saving just for driving a battery electric. And that's at 2.60 Rand, which is charging your car in your garage.
Wow, so some significant savings there on the operating cost.
Definitely.
And what about the expectations around charging? So home, public charging, and also the range?
So expectations from consumers are starting to match reality. So you'll see their perceptions, expectations, and then there's reality. And the moment perceptions, expectations, and reality meet in the middle, we have an educated consumer. So you can see 58% of consumers believe that they can charge an EV in under 4 hours, 2% more than the previous year. Okay, which is absolutely true. You can charge an EV in under 4 hours. But the expectation when buying shifts to the right. 76% want it charged in under 4 hours. So they perceive it to be able to be charged under 4 hours, but when I actually buy my EV, a vast majority of consumers, it'll be a deal breaker that the car has to charge in under 4 hours. But as I said in the beginning, a positive note is that these two charts are starting to align, which means that our education efforts are starting to be realized.
Which is great to hear, because that's what we're all about here at Smarter Mobility Africa Summit, inspiring transformation to integrated smarter mobility. It's about education, awareness. So good to hear that hopefully some of what we're doing, some of what you're doing is having that role of education, and good to see that that's decreasing. So what about charging overnight and those kind of perceptions?
So public fast charging, perceptions and expectations are still a little bit off, in that 81% of consumers want their EV to fully charge in under an hour at a public fast charger. Now, it's very possible. There is a 150 kilowatt charger at Colesberg in the middle of the country, and you could charge a 90 kilowatt hour battery in approximately an hour at that particular charger. But what's interesting is people that expect the public charger to charge the car within 30 minutes. In order for us to get that right, we need a lot faster chargers in South Africa.
And is that ever a requirement that you have, the 30-minute charge or the 20-minute charge?
No. So my experience in driving my EV long distance is that you never drive it to zero. That's another myth that consumers have. You never drive it to zero. I stop my car at a public charging station at approximately 20% battery. Not below that, because you could get yourself into trouble. And I very rarely charge it above 80%, because it charges very quickly to 80, and then the charge time starts to throttle back, because the inverter can't run the electrons through the battery as fast from 80 to 100%. So the fastest way to get anywhere in an EV is 20 to 80.
Okay, yeah. So let's look at range, because that's always been an interesting one. You know, it's one of the most talked about things as the EV industry started to evolve, is about the range and range anxiety. So what are some of the findings we have here?
So 42% of respondents in the survey believe that the average EV delivers 300 kilometers on a single charge. Now, this is true. 300 kilometers on a single charge is more or less what the average EV delivers. But 56% of respondents stated that they required more than 500 kilometers of range when they actually purchased an EV, which I think is a little bit unrealistic. And it goes to show that consumers are still comparing ICE vehicle range to EV range. And I think we've got a little bit of an uphill communication battle there to change that perception.
Yeah, and I mentioned education at the start of our presentation, and this certainly bears out. Home charging is an important factor when the average consumer doesn't travel, more than 400 kilometers a day.
40 kilometers.
40, yeah.
40 kilometers a day.
40, yeah, 400 kilometers a week.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because what was that figure you had in the previous slide? 2,600 kilometers?
Yeah, about 2,600 kilometers. So the average consumer won't use more than 10 to 20% of the battery anyway.
Yeah.
In any single day.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
So that brings us to what we call the adoption trinity. And we've now called it the adoption trinity because it's been the same theme for the last 4 years of this survey. And that is, consumers are far more aligned to reality in terms of home and public fast charging. Charging is still a concern, but we're closer to the finish line in terms of education. Consumers do not want an EV with less than 300 kilometers of range, very possible in today's world. So I think we're closer there as well, although adoption will require more than 300 kilometers range. So I think there's a little bit of an education gap to go there. Where the biggest sore thumb lies is in the price point of 500,000 Rand. And in order for us to achieve that, we need that white paper that I believe the government is working on, and we need the incentives for manufacture, the incentives for the consumer, as well as the incentives for import.
And I know the National Association for Automotive Manufacturers South Africa is currently working on solutions with government. How much time do they realistically have for this change?
We don't have a lot of time given the 2030 to 2035 deadlines. So from a consumer point of view and from an economic point of view, we don't have a lot of time. When the government is going to table that white paper, I don't know. I hope it's imminent. I believe there's a lot of talk going on about it at the moment. So I'm hoping that it's really imminent.
Yeah, and then there's different policies and momentum across different countries in Africa as well. I don't know, hands up, anyone who here is from outside of South Africa? Anyone? We've got a very SA audience, there we go. Yeah. Alex, I think, fleet manager. There's lots happening across the continent as well. So, we look at Europe and the deadlines there, but then there's, local countries that are also changing things very quickly.
As a continent, we have to, I think, move together because as a continent, I think we've got more population than the United States.
Yeah, wow, there you go. So, purchase intent.
Yeah, so what purchase intent measures is how far into the future would consumers consider buying an EV. And 58% of the respondents in the survey said that they would consider purchasing an electric vehicle in the future. And you can see in the bar charts there how far into the future consumers would consider purchasing an EV. What was surprising to us was that the bars on the right-hand side are growing ever so slightly. And we want to dig into the reasons why those bars are growing ever so slightly. Why would consumers say they will never purchase an EV? Maybe it's the V8 petrol heads. I don't know, but there is a growing contingent of people that will never buy an EV. The rest of the chart, however, seems to be pretty stable.
Interesting. And then how does this kind of result compare to hybrid?
So if we had to let's change that, there we go. In the next 3 years, however, and I think this is where the shift is going, so it's not all bad. In the next 3 years, 46% of car shoppers would consider an EV, and almost half of those respondents would consider it a hybrid. So I think hybrid is definitely the middle step to going full battery electric, and it's an exciting time because it means that new energy vehicles in the form of hybrids, hydrogen, and full battery electric vehicles are part of our future.
Mm-hmm. So car manufacturers may be missing a trick.
Yeah, they may be missing a trick. Some car manufacturers have nailed their flag to the hybrid mast, some to the full battery electric mast, and some to both. And I think it would be smart to nail their flag to both.
I don't envy them, actually. They have a hard
decision to make.
landscape to navigate. I think they're speaking here later. Was it tomorrow?
It's today.
Today. So you'll be hosting a number of the CEOs of OEMs about the challenges that they face. It's not as easy as just saying, let's go for that option or that option.
Exactly.
So you have to feel for them as well as also see where you think the future is. So let's look at EV and trust.
So, looking at EV and trust, and this is always an interesting part of this the survey. The first interesting part is which brands have launched in South Africa. So that was the question: which brands have launched in South Africa? And Tesla always seems to make an appearance. You'll see that 22% last year, 23% this year. People do believe that Tesla are in South Africa.
Rubicon are doing a good job then.
Exactly. And Tesla are actually not in South Africa, and most of the vehicles in the survey in previous years had not launched an EV in the country yet. But the other takeaway in this survey is that BMW is making strides. You can see BMW was number one last year, and it's still number one in terms of consumers perceiving brands to have launched electric vehicles. Audi is making strides, but what's interesting is if you look at Mercedes-Benz, Mercedes-Benz was number 3 last year. It's actually number 2 this year in the survey in terms of brands having launched EVs in South Africa, which means that Mercedes-Benz is doing a really good marketing job in telling consumers what they've got in the market.
And there's room for movement and change, I guess.
Exactly. And then we move on to trust. So it's one thing being aware of a particular brand, it's another thing trusting a brand. And what is interesting about a chart like this is that South Africans don't necessarily trust. Let me put it the other way. South Africans trust the technology more than they trust the brand. South Africans seem to trust electric vehicles first before believing in the brand. And this has come through for the last 4 years that we've done this survey. BMW still holds the candle when it comes to trust. Toyota has fallen from second place to third place, and Mercedes-Benz has eclipsed them. Again.
That's a good reminder for any automotive company that's entering the market, but I think also these startups that are here that are just innovating and bringing new solutions, the nature of the market that we find ourselves in today is one that's rapidly changing and creating opportunities for all sorts of new technologies and brands to make their mark.
Exactly right, exactly right. So, in conclusion, Ben, addressing the dilemma of the Holy Trinity, more education, more of what you guys are doing here, and thank you very much for putting this on. It's fascinating, and it's getting busier and busier each year that we come. And we need to deal with the 500,000 Rand price point. There's a whole bunch of mechanisms that need to be addressed underneath that. And all we can do is educate.
Yeah, no, George, great to have you with us once again. Great to be working with AutoTrader. I think, for anyone that wants to keep up to date on what's happening in the market for electric vehicles, new energy vehicles, check out the AutoTrader site. You've got the report section, but also just have a search around, right? You can just see so much by seeing which second-hand cars are being sold. Is it the BMW? Is it the, I was going to say Tesla. They're not. Well, you might see a second-hand Tesla soon if Rubicon decides to sell their one. But there's so much insights on your website. So thanks for working with us. It's great to be working with you. And we look forward to doing it all over again for next year.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.